Okay, ladies and gentlemen, let's get into another HSR analysis. We got Clara today, a 5-star physical destruction character. I've read through her kit and it's quite interesting. It's going to be quite a unique play style, at least. You're going to have to approach this character a bit differently. But obviously, she's a destruction character. What does that mean? Well, that means a general DPS. That means it's going to be a mixture of single target and AoE DPS. It's not going to be one or the other. It's going to be a mixture of both. And obviously physical, it's nothing special, just another one of the types, but obviously we don't get this one as often, I believe, but I could be wrong about that. Regardless, this character, we have to approach it from a different area. So the basic attack, by the way, is just standard single target, 110 at the end percentage, but this one, we're going to read the talent first. The talent is a very important piece of the puzzle. So under the protection of Savarog, which is the massive robot that Clara has with her, Clara's damage taken is reduced by 15%. Savarog will mark enemies who attack Clara with mark of counter and retaliate with a counter dealing physical damage equal to a certain percentage of Clara's attack. We have to understand that because the mark of counter is very important for the rest of her kit. So essentially, she has a defense reduction, that's fine, but whenever enemies hit Clara, not Clara hits enemies, but enemies hit Clara, they will be marked with mark of counter and retaliate with a counter. Then that's where the damage is dealt. Now, after reading that, we can go into the skill and the burst. So now looking at the skill, deal physical damage equal to a certain percentage of Clara's attack to all enemies. Deal additional physical damage equal to a certain percentage of Clara's attack to enemies marked by Savarog with a mark of counter. All marks of counter will be removed after the skill is used. Yes, so essentially her skill is a single target, an AoE ability that does AoE damage, and then additionally, if the enemies are marked, it'll deal another instance of that damage and remove the mark. But remember, to apply the mark, the enemies have to hit Clara herself, right? They have to hit her. So it's going to be a bit of a tricky. So how are we going to do that? Well, that's where the burst comes in, and it's going to be quite an interesting burst. So after using her ultimate, damage dealt to Clara is reduced by an additional certain percentage up to 27, which is quite chunky. And Clara has a greatly increased chance of being attacked by enemies for 2 turns. So essentially she gets an aggro boost for 2 turns, which is really good. But this is the very different playstyle that she's going to have now, like once you introduce her into a team, because she is a DPS that takes aggro. So it's going to be a bit of a tricky thing to do. But in addition, Savarog's counter is enhanced. When an ally is attacked, Savarog is guaranteed to launch counters, with its counter damage multiplier on the enemy increases to a very large percentage, 172% at the high end. Adjacent enemies take 50% of the damage dealt to the target enemy. Enhanced counter can take effect 2 times. So, that is that. Essentially, she gets a damage reduction and she gets aggro a lot through her burst. She gets a lot of aggro for 2 turns. And the counterattack by Savarog is well, it's enhanced. It's you deal a lot more damage essentially with the counterattack. But simply put, when enemies hit Clara, they will be marked by Savarog with mark of counter, and then that will cause Savarog to counter onto them essentially anytime they hit Clara. You can deal a burst of damage by using your skill to remove the mark, but you deal a massive burst of damage to all enemies essentially. But that obviously they have to be marked to deal that extra hit of damage. And then at the same time, you can use her burst to enhance the countering mechanic and essentially make Clara the pseudo tank for the next 2 turns. But obviously she does get a damage reduction, which is very helpful along the way. But that is the base kit. Her technique, not important too much, but upon entering the battle, the chance of Clara will be attacked by enemies increases by for 2 turns, which is standard. I don't know if you really want to use that a lot because the burst, but whatever. It's a small aggro increase. Moving on to the traces. When Clara is attacked, there's a 35% fixed chance to remove a debuff currently applied to her, which is fine. She can have her own cleansing trace, which is great. Eidolon 2, resistance to crowd control debuffs is increased by 35%, which is fine, and increases Savarog's counter damage by 30%. This is all fine, and the character standalone is fine. It's an interesting character. It kind of plays in the area of you have to taunt the enemies, you have to aggro them onto the character, and the character has to be able to live throughout all of the attacks happening on her to really get value. But essentially, the enemies will attack Clara. Clara will do a counter attack back, and that is kind of where most of your damage will be coming from. Not all of your damage, but most of your damage. A lot of your damage may also come from the skill, and if you consume all the counters, the mark of counters. But obviously there is a eidolon that changes that, which we'll get into in just a second. But bear in mind, Clara is a unique character. Will she be good or will she be bad? So far, it's standard kit. She's going to be interesting, to say the least. Very interesting. But she is enhanced greatly through eidolons, and I have read them, and some of them do change her gameplay to the point where you actually... it's a completely different playstyle. So if we move down, we're going to look at first eidolon. Using Clara's skill will not remove the mark of counter on the enemy. This is the first one, and this is the one that I'm talking about that might change the way you approach this character. Now, usually, this is not too impactful, but if you think about it, not being able to remove the mark of counter means that you can kind of save the instant damage for whenever you need it, or you can just chuck it out at any time, really. It's kind of like you remove a certain restriction from yourself. Before, without this eidolon, if your skill did remove it, you'd want all the enemies to be marked, and then you hit all the enemies, and they all take incredibly large amounts of damage. It would be a total of 264% damage on all enemies. But now with the mark not being removed with eidolon 1, well, the stuff that you can do is essentially just use your skill whenever you need to finish off an enemy that is already marked, and then so on and so forth. It kind of lets you be a bit more aggressive, per se. So that's really good. Eidolon 2, after using Clara's ultimate, her attack increases by 30%. This goes in line with the enhanced counter. It's going to be along... That's the only thing that's going to be enhancing, is the enhanced counter itself. Once enemies attack Clara after she uses her ultimate, because she's got aggro increase, she'll now deal 30% increased damage because of the 30% increased attack, essentially. Eidolon 3 is skill plus 2 and basic attack plus 1, standard. And then Eidolon 4, after being hit, damage taken by Clara is reduced by 30%. This effect lasts until the start of her next turn. Really good, essentially because it's going to play to the fact that she's not going to have a turn until after she's been attacked by all the enemies, right? So Eidolon 4 is going to be essentially where she's at her peak defensiveness. She's going to use her ultimate, and then she's going to go to the bottom of the attack order, because she doesn't deal all of her damage being an active character. So speed is not going to be an overly important thing. And so she uses her ultimate, she gets a lot of aggro, and for essentially the next however many turns until her turn, she's going to be constantly getting attacked by the enemies, constantly, but all that damage is reduced by 30%, obviously then plus this 27 in the actual ultimate, she's taking incredibly reduced damage, and at that same time, if you have like a preservation character, you may be able to increase the tankiness. If you have a healer character, make sure she doesn't die. So there's a lot of defensives now once we get to the eidolons, which is probably going to make her, you can substitute her for a tank if you really desired. You can substitute her for a tank, which probably may be pretty good. But that's Eidolon 4. Eidolon 5 is ultimate plus 2 and basic attack plus 1, standard. And then Eidolon 6, after other allies are hit, this is the kicker, this is the part that may make her really powerful. After other allies are hit, Savarog also has a 50% chance to trigger a counter on the attacker and mark them with mark of counter. When using Clara's ultimate, trigger an additional 1 enhanced counter. This one has a very high percent chance to kind of introduce a certain level of brokenness to the character, because just having her on the team, no aggro to her, any enemy that is attacked will have a chance to trigger a counter. Now, obviously, when it attacks Clara herself, it's a 100% chance to trigger because of the talent. That will 100% always happen when it attacks Clara. But Eidolon 6, when anyone is attacked, there's a chance to trigger it. And obviously you get one more enhanced counter from the ultimate, which is, well, that's just more damage, right? More damage. So great. So the character, not that I'm going to say she's Eidolon dependent, but her Eidolons do play a pretty pivotal part in her character being very prominent. Eidolon 1 being one that essentially will make her really good at DPSing. Obviously, if you mark and counter, if you mark of counter all the enemies, and then proceed to just spam your skill on them, well, you're going to be in a very good position, because that's a lot of AoE damage going out. 264% is a very high amount of damage going out, right? The next one would be Eidolon 4. which, well, listen, 30% damage reduction after being hit is pretty incredible for a character who's meant to be getting hit, so you go do the maths, right? And then Eidolon 6, essentially making her core part of her kit function with every other character in the party at obviously a fixed percentage, but still working with other party members is incredibly powerful. But that's the character. Very powerful, Eidolon dependent. I'm going to use that term loosely, Eidolon dependent. Not super Eidolon dependent, but I will use it very, very loosely here. The character is very, very, very interesting, and I think getting this character will definitely not be anywhere near a detriment like getting some certain 5 stars in other games per se. But the light cone is a very integral part of the character as well. Can this make her even better? Well, yes, it can. The Eidolon will make her deal more damage and also heal and be tankier. So what does it do? Something irreplaceable is her signature. Increases the wearer's attack by a certain percentage when the wearer defeats an enemy or is hit, so she has to kill or be hit, immediately restore HP equal to a certain percentage of the wearer's attack, right? It's of the wearer's attack. So if your attack is like 7k, whatever, you'll heal 6% of 7k. That's how it is. So that's good. That's the tankiness part, by the way. You just heal whenever you're attacked, and as Clara is a character who gets hit all the time, well, healing every single time for a certain percentage, that means that you're essentially removing an X amount of damage from the enemy's attack, obviously, unless you are at 100% HP, but that's neither here nor there. Next part is, at the same time, the wearer's damage increases by a certain percentage until the end of their next turn. This effect cannot stack and can only trigger once per turn. Again, it plays very specifically to her playstyle, as after her turn ends, well, essentially, she'll have a damage boost until the start, at the end of her next turn, which will then essentially make it so her counters, it's a buff to her counters, is what I'm trying to explain, essentially. It's a buff to her counter mechanic, not so much her active damage mechanic. So there's that. So you get a damage boost and some healing. That is obviously going to be her best in slot. Will the other 5-star be able to hold up the fall of the Aeon? Yeah, you could probably use this one. It's fine. It's a damage increase whenever the wearer attacks. You get a stacking damage increase up to 4 times. And then weakness break gives you a bigger damage boost. That's fine. You can definitely run that. But obviously something irreplaceable is going to be her signature because you want a bit more tankiness through the healing. For 4 stars, probably some of these. You could probably try to run R-lands, increase damage by a certain percentage, and then when your HP is lower comparatively to the enemies, get a bigger damage increase. You could run that. That is obviously running a risky build because the character doesn't have innate healing. You'll have to substitute that with active healing. Nowhere to run increases damage, attack by a certain percentage. Whenever the wearer defeats an enemy, they heal a certain percentage. This one is definitely a good contender for being a supportive, a healing and tankiness one, but it's on kill. It's a very specific one on kill, and that's kind of hard to guarantee that Clara will be the one always killing them. So obviously, because she's a countering enemy, so the enemies kind of have to hit you for them to die. So it's kind of like a very risky back and forth between getting hit and hitting. So bear that in mind with this one. It can be there, but I wouldn't recommend it. It's very risky. For every basic attack, skill, and ultimate use, the wearer gains 1 of Stack of Mischievous. Each stack increases the wearer's attack. You can definitely use this one. Definitely not a problem using this one. You just have to use your attack, skill, and ultimate ones each, and you get 3 stacks of the buff. And you'll have a lot of damage increase permanently, I believe. I believe it's a permanent stack throughout the fight. So the Mole's Welcome You is definitely a fine thing that you can do. And if anything, it's going to be your most standard equipable one from the 4 stars. And then Wolf Walk Time increases the damage, the wearer's attack by a certain percentage and increases their damage to enemies afflicted with burn or bleed. And this also applies to Dot. Your character doesn't do burn or bleed. Clara doesn't do that, so not this one. So I'd say your 2 best contenders are essentially the Mole's Welcome You as well as Nowhere to Run. They are the easiest ones to equip and just kind of go have a good time. And then lastly would be probably a Secret Vow. Wolf Walk Time is useless. And for 3 stars, it's probably Collapsing Sky if people were curious. Now, as for the relic sets, it's pretty obvious. Just the 4 set physical, really. Where is it? Did I miss it? The 4 set physical is probably going to be your best choice. Honestly, the 4 set seems very specific to Clara. So what does it say? Increase physical damage by 10% on the 2 set, which is standard. But then the 4 set, after the wearer attacks or is hit, right? That's the kicker, right? Is hit, their attack increases by 5% for the rest of this battle. This can stack up to 5 times. Means Clara will be able to stack this up very quickly as, let's say you start the fight off with your ultimate, you haven't actually hit anyone, but you're going to get hit 5 times in a row, essentially, or 4 times in a row. And then on your next turn, you hit an enemy. And so you've got 5 stacks essentially within one cycle phase, whilst some characters will take a fair while to do this one. So the 4-set physical of this one, Champion of the Streetwise Boxing, is going to be her best choice there. And as for planetary ornaments, you got a lot to choose from here because she's such a generic character in terms of like she's just DPS, right? But she doesn't have a dependency on anything per se. So you could go for Celestial Differentiator if you just want to increase the damage of her skill. Obviously, it's a crit rate dependency at 80% to get that skill damage increase, and I think her skill damage, it will be some of her highest AoE damage that she can apply, so bear that in mind. If you do want to go for a bit of a boom AoE damage build, this would probably be the choice, but obviously remember, again, 80% crit rate dependency to trigger this last effect. Inert Salsodo, if you want to, I guess, there's absolutely no reason to choose this one as the ultimate and follow-up attack damage. She doesn't have a follow-up attack unless counters are considered follow-up attacks. I'm not sure. I don't believe they are. But ultimate damage, she doesn't really have ultimate damage, and I'm unsure if I want to say that her the damage percentage increase that happens to her counter through her ultimate is considered ultimate damage. I do believe it is an application of a buff, but the damage is still dependent on her talent. So I don't think Inert Salsoda will do anything for you, so just avoid this one. Space Sealing Station, as always, attack increase by a certain, you need a certain speed percentage, which is fine. You could definitely go for this one. It's just generic. Other than that, Talia, Kingdom of Banditry is the only other one, as Break Effect is useful and it has a 145 speed dependency, so bear that in mind as well to get another 28%. So those are the only options. Everything else is kind of dog shit. So Celestial Differentiator, Space Sealing Station, and Talia, Kingdom of Banditry are the only viable ones here. The most generic one will probably be Space Sealing Station, though, let's be real. So that is that. The relic set is Champion of Streetwise Boxing, and the recommendation is Space Sealing Station. Honestly, this is becoming a very generic gearing list. Obviously, a lot of it is going to come down to substats, I know. I know I just recommend a set bonus, but yeah, a lot of it's going to come down to substat management and whatnot, and which substats do you have where, and what main stats do you have, so bear that in mind. But I'm recommending set bonuses for now, as stat management is something that we're going to have to do for the next 45 years after the game launches, as always, right? So that's been Clara. She's an absolute unit once you get certain eidolons on her, but for standard character, she's quite alright. I wouldn't call her overpowered, but yes, she's still going to be a very unique playstyle, and may be able to substitute a tank in certain situations if you don't have one. So with that, hope you guys did enjoy Clara's little analysis. If you did, like and subscribe to the channel, and have a great evening, or afternoon. It's actually just afternoon for me. I don't know why I said evening. Have a great afternoon, or evening, or morning, and I'll catch you guys in the next analysis. Peace out.